Hey, Tim, welcome to Women Seeking Wholeness. I have had a male guest for a very long time, so
Hi, Cherie. How are you? And yeah, so it's the first time in my professional career that there's probably more women engaged in what I do than men. It's interesting.
well, there may be a myriad of reasons for that, but it's certainly not gender specific when you're walking through hell. You and I were just having this conversation earlier before we started recording around, how devastating it is when you're faced with marital issues and ultimately divorce or separation. I certainly have walked that path myself, but um, what, and just to let the listeners know who are new to my show, my husband and I almost divorced after 25 years of marriage. We were separated. We had lawyers. We were in separate homes. It was excruciating on multiple. First, it was liberating. Then it was excruciating. Then it was liberating again. Then it was super excruciating. It was a roller coaster unlike anything that I have ever experienced. And ultimately ending in a point of reckoning where we looked at each other literally with papers and pens in hand to sign, and we just couldn't do it. And for those of you who are not seeing this on YouTube, Tim is like putting his hand to his head, like, oh my gosh, like it was such a line in the sand in my life to make the decision to make it work. And I need to offer a disclaimer before we keep going with our conversation. I told you this, Tim, because you and I share a mission to help save marriages. But deeper than that, I want to save people. And there's some people in some marriages that cannot be quote unquote saved, that they're not willing to save themselves or the marriage. And that's my disclaimer, only because every situation is so incredibly sacred and unique. And what we're going to focus on today is your genius after you walk through your excruciating divorce. I'm like laughing while I'm saying excruciating. I don't mean to be insensitive, but only because I can relate. Maybe not that
That in and of itself is a superficial description. I've seen hell from below, as I like to say.
Oh, yes. And I'm so sorry. Anytime I meet somebody who's had a really painful divorce, I'm just like, oh, so sorry. It's terrible. Okay. So, but your genius is giving people, helping them tackle the issues and really climb into a successful marriage. So why don't you define for us? I know you talk a lot about this, but if you could just narrow in on what is a successful marriage, how would you define a successful marriage?
Well, when I say I've solved the problem, what I literally mean by that is equality, and all that means is we're trying to figure out how to build partnerships, and that is okay. We're done. Thanks for the interview. I mean, that literally we could end that. In fact, I do that when I go through my seminar. It's halfway through my seminar where I get to and I discuss, and there's obviously a lot of conversation on what it means in the partnership, but when I get to that conversation, I say we could end it at that. But so let me just kind of, and I'll make this short, but the reason why relationships are successful is because couples get along. The reason why relationships are unsuccessful is because couples don't get along.
I love that. It's so really simple. It's a good description.
It simplifies it, and that highlights conflict resolution. Because all I'm doing is I'm making people consciously aware of conflict resolution. Then when you get in the whole concept of conflict resolution, there is one and only one characteristic of relationships that don't work that is almost 100% of the case. And there's nothing else that even comes close to even touching on how significant control is in determining the difference between success and failure. Control is control. You know, if you're in an unsuccessful relationship, that relationship is unsuccessful because one or both are trying to control the relationship. No other description that can describe it so succinctly than control.
Wow. And it's like people are grabbing for control because they feel powerless, right?
Well, that's the psychological motivation behind control. And that's when you get into the whole psychological discussion. It's powerless, it's fear ultimately, but you have to understand why you're fearful of something happening, because Carl Jung, you familiar with Carl Jung?
Oh, I'm a huge girl fan. I mean, boy fan. I don't know. He's not a girl.
That's to say. So anybody that doesn't know, Carl Jung was 19 years younger than Freud. Let's just say Freud looked up to him so much he considered him not only his heir apparent but his son. And Jung disagreed with Freud's sex theory. And Jung went much further than Freud did in figuring out how the mind works. 20% of my book is a summary of his autobiography, by the way. But in fact, I'm advancing some of Carl Jung's concepts, just so you know. That's how deep my conversation is. But one of my favorite Carl Jung concepts is the goal is to make conscious what is unconscious, or else it appears as fake. That is the objective of a relationship. If you want to learn how to grow together, learn that, because what you're trying to do is figuring out those traumas from your past. And once you become aware of them, that's the first step to healing, which is forgiveness. And once you're able to do that, and you partner do that together, that's called growing together.
So what was that? You learn to make what is unconscious conscious, so that what? So it's not fake?
Or else it appears as fake.
Yeah.
So say your parents got divorced, for example, and so you have a fear of divorce in your marriage. You're unconscious of it. Fear is an unconscious motivation. You're unconscious of it, but you project that fear onto what your spouse is doing, and then you become judgmental of your spouse. And you either become aware that you're doing this and understand that the reason why you're doing this has nothing to do with your spouse, which is the most humorous thing you realize when you study this stuff to its conclusion. You're blaming your spouse on something that's happened to you in your past. You now go and look at the source of the problem. And that's why the Chinese have a saying, and that saying is that history is a mirror. I just got done working with a couple, first meeting with a new couple I'm working with, and I'm going through in an extensive conversation. You want to get to know yourself, don't you? The one person that you spend the most time with is you. So if you're friends with yourself, then you're going to have a successful relationship. And that's the psychological conversation.
Yeah, it's like, do you get along with yourself?
Yeah. I define the two voices. Carl Jung defined the two voices. When I say I've advanced Carl Jung's concepts, I'm just basically describing what he meant by the collective unconscious. If you're a big Jung fan, I describe what that means. Nobody's figured that out yet, but I have finally figured out what the collective unconscious is. And just so you know, it's common sense, big, huge declaration, first time you've ever heard that.
But there's also a dark side to that. There's a dark collective, and it's not super sensical. That's saying.
Not what Carl Jung discovered. Carl Jung discovered was that culture is developing. Is when you look at the messages throughout history, and the biggest example we have is religion, but you look at the messages that have been teaching us, which is what the collective unconscious is, an aggregation of archetypes. Archetypes are patterns of thought or symbolic imagery from the collective past. That's what the collective unconscious is. And you get people who interject a negative, Hitler, whatever, into that scenario. But what you find out, in fact, one of the things when you psychoanalyze, Nazism, if I could be so weird, you realize that what he tried to do is he tried to borrow symbolic messages. The broken cross is a Buddha symbol. I don't know if you've ever seen that before, but I've seen a picture with a Buddha with the swastika in the middle of the Buddha's chest. Hitler stole the swastika, and we've taken it, and now we've equated it with a negative stereotype, a negative archetype. But it started. He played it. Christianity did the same thing. The original flood story was written at the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written 1,500 years before Old Testament. That's called developing mythologies, developing messages. Nobody invents messages.
There's some really interesting books on that, like The Myth of Innocence, and I'm a huge archetype. Like, my next step in life, maybe after my book is out, is to go into a master's PhD program in Jungian, depth psychology with a Jungian archetypal studies emphasis. Like, I'm that fascinated by it. The myths and the stories.
Let me interject something. Let me interject something very important.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. This is good. The hair at the end of my arms is standing up. This conversation has just turned into a beautiful direction. I am introducing and discussing, for the first time in the history of the psychology industry, a new archetype.
Okay.
And it's prejudice as a negative thing.
Okay.
Prejudice used to be positive. I grew up with my dad, the N word, the J word. I grew up with all that stuff. Society has taught us versus them as a good thing. And we accepted that. We accepted we belong to a church. We accepted that we belong to the United States. And if we're told that the French are bad or the African Americans are bad, that is how society developed. One of the things you get in the Jungian conversation, he refers to as a process called individuation. We're going from a culture defined by groups to a culture defined by individuals, because we're finally as educated as we are.
Love it. And that's basically, you're just describing my faith crisis from my religion of birth that I experienced a few years ago, is that process of individuation. Yeah.
When I was 12 years old, I told my mom I wanted to be a Catholic priest, and then I discovered girls. So I actually started my my journey on this whole, religious spiritual thing. I started mine when I was a child, and I can't believe I used to talk about semiconductors. Now I get to talk about God and religion and stuff. Like, one of the things you realize when you study Jung, you discovered that Freud was replacing what he literally said was a God from above with a God from below. And what he's figuratively saying is that Freud was replacing religion with sex. And so that's why I told you about my marriage support group.
Interesting.
What?
That's super interesting.
Oh,
Freud was very, by the way, I have a bachelor's in psych. I mean, it's very limited exposure to some of these figures, but Freud was definitely fixated on sexuality. And
yeah, but it's because he saw his mother naked when he was 2 years old and was aroused, and he saw infant boys with erections while they were breastfeeding. That is the entire foundation of the entire psychology industry. That is why we have a biology approach. That's why you hear about the mind and the brain from the professionals. It's because Freud propagated a biology theory that was actually started with Descartes' duality, or Descartes duality in the 18th century, splitting the mind and the brain up, giving the brain the science, and the mind went to the church. That is what Freud did. He propagated the biology theory. There's no psychology in psychology yet. When Jung gives when Freud died, and his accolades, Jung refers to Freud as what his work did was epic making. And the way he described it is that Freud introduced psychology into psychiatry. When you understand the development of what's going on up here, was psychiatry first, and Freud introduced psychology into psychiatry. But what Freud did not do is he did not introduce psychology into psychology. He introduced biology into psychology. So there's no psychological approach to the psychology industry, which is really kind of fascinating when you realize
that is really interesting. I never much resonated with a lot of psychoanalyst stuff, but Jungian definitely appeals to me because it has more of a spiritual, like the collective aspect of it. Just from a woman's lived experience and me unpacking, and part of my fascination and research has been around how the feminine has been disempowered, the goddess removed from the temple, and that's its own like macrocosmic collective unconscious is the denigration of the feminine. And I talk a lot about that on this podcast.
Can I interject something? Okay.
Yes.
It was the papal bull of Pope Pius XII, I believe, in 1954. Jung discovered this. Either Jung did or I did, I forget. But it was the papal bull of 1954 that finally brought Mary in proximity to Jesus. The Catholic Church finally, 1,920 years after the death of Jesus, it was 1950.
Are you talking about Mary the mother or Mary Magdalene?
Mary the mother. No, they won't ever accept Mary as a girlfriend. That'll never happen. But
I wouldn't say never. It's coming.
You're right. I mean, where this is going, who Jesus really was, it's fascinating to psychoanalyze. That's what Jung did. Jung psychoanalyzed Jesus, by the way. But what the church is doing is they're finally removing themselves from the patriarchy nature with this papal bull of 1950 that puts Mary in close proximity to Jesus, plus bringing, as I think Jung discusses, the feminine and the masculine into proximity of each other. This is what you're trying to happen. This is why when I say I solve the concept of when it's equality, quite honestly, and all I mean by that is the man and the woman both being able to think and feel in the relationship. Addressing it mentally, masculinity is logical. That's historically we were logical. Women, femininity is emotional. Historical women were emotional. That is a fact before the education of women in the 60s. And now we're trying to figure out how to crossbreed, so to speak, so that we can do both. That's what we're trying to figure out how to do psychologically.
Yeah, and I don't know if you probably have studied Joseph Campbell and the Hero's Journey, and the final step is the integration of masculine and feminine, which is very Jungian.
Yeah.
But
well, Joseph
I'm
Campbell
curious.
is Young's #1 student.
Yes, and I've been to Pacifica and I've seen their desks, and that's where I want to get my master's and PhD eventually.
And George Lucas credits Star Wars with
To the Hero's
Joseph
Journey.
Campbell.
Yes, absolutely.
Just so that the audience understands what's significant about this weird conversation Sheree and I are having. We're
all, and I've on this podcast, I've actually interviewed Maxine Murdoch, who wrote The Heroine's Journey 30 years ago. She did a feminine version of the hero's journey, but it's the same process. The goal being integration. So when you're talking about individuation, and let's move into marriage too, because there's a real crisis in people being able to know how to individuate and not become codependent in their marital relationships. Some of it is from our programming. Like, I'm curious about your new, what did you say, a new field that you're creating, or a new,
the new archetype,
the new archetype. I have my own ideas of archetypes that I think that are emerging right now are very powerful. Mary Magdalene being one of them. Okay. Because I'm writing.
This is prejudice. This is the archetype I'm talking about. When you see a public demonstration, and those of us who have an ounce of intelligence, okay, I can't say that. That's any of us who are thinking people, okay, and we look at, I had an African-American friend of mine, I said, have you been arrested? He goes, yeah, I was just arrested a couple months ago. I'm like, are you serious? I mean, we are being exposed to the ignorance of prejudice. And those of us that are becoming more aware of that, because what happens is you develop a relationship prejudice. Mom and dad got divorced. Now you have a prejudice about marriage because of what your parents taught you. And that's where our mental problems are prejudices. This is the first time you've ever heard this, because it's never been publicly stated before by anybody in the industry. But our mental problems are prejudices, which are preconceived opinions, which are emotionally based, which have not been thought out. And what you're doing in analysis work is you're supposed to be bringing those from the attic of the unconscious, those experiences from the attic of the unconscious, bringing them back to the living room of consciousness. And now we get to have a more adult conversation about those experiences, and hopefully we can look at them from a different perspective. And that awareness and enlightenment is what gives us a better understanding of the objectivity of the goal, even when you're able to look at it from the other person's perspective, which is what you're supposed to be doing. One of the steps of maturity is understanding the other person's perspective. And you can't do that unless you go through the healing from your childhood. I mean, there's a maturity process, which is what Jung is describing. He's describing a maturity process that we're all supposed to be going through in order for us to ultimately end up as an individual, because that's what we're trying to figure out.
Right. So in my mind, the healthiest archetypes and the healthiest, well, I believe Jesus and Mary Magdalene could be a very healthy archetype for shared egalitarian leadership and partnership, divine masculine, divine. They're both individuated, but they're both powerful, but they come together as I guess a divine power couple. So I actually use that archetype because I am a huge Mary Magdalene enthusiast, divine feminine enthusiast. I've traveled.
I'm a huge Dan Brown fan.
Writing a book on it. Well, Dan Brown, yeah, he broke it open to the consciousness, but a little bit, but
weird.
But this is, we'll give that to him. I'm really grateful that started a larger discussion about who she was. But diving into the Gnostic texts and looking at the wisdom tradition, and this is the new paradigm. This is what people, where we want to come back to that. You even look at it in Egyptian, hieroglyphs, where, you have Isis and Osiris and Horus, and you see that divine coupling. You see true empowerment as individuals. This is something, and I am writing a book about Mary Magdalene and kind of mirroring it with my life, some of the experiences that I've walked through in my life. And it's so interesting. I feel like we're moving into an age where people want permission to individuate, to break away from the groupthink, the old paradigms, and to be able to create their own reality, I guess. apart from what they've inherited. Even some of the old dogma about marriage is just like a barf. Like it, and I just had this conversation with somebody that it's not meant to be about suffering.
No, not at all. That's the point. That's the point.
That's the whole, yeah. Why get married? Like, why be in a partnership if it's not fun and exciting? And like you said, unless you're not getting along, what's the whole point?
But here's the point, though. Okay. In fact, just to finish what you were talking about, because what Jung did, I love it when anybody says the word Gnosticism, and I get in a whole nother plane. But what Jung did is he connected Gnosticism through what I call the spiritual alchemists from the Middle Ages.
Alchemists, yeah.
The spiritual alchemists, not the material alchemists.
Right.
When you get into a material versus spiritual philosophical conversation, but this notion of melting lead and on the other side is gold, that's the material alchemist. But the spiritual alchemists they refer to it as the philosopher's stone. And then Jung takes the concept of the philosopher's stone, and he then in his grand conclusions is called spiritual transformation. That's where he takes the whole Gnosticism to alchemy to the modern mind. And then what I'm doing is the only reason, Cherie, why I am sitting here today having this conversation with you, the only reason why I'm able to even have this conversation with you is because I forgave my parents when I was 25 years old. Little did I realize at the time that is going to be the foundation of my message as an introduction to how you actually go through spiritual transformation. As I like to say, you're supposed to be born twice. The first is obvious, but the second is when you get born into adulthood. But the goal is a balanced ego is not when you're better than anybody else. It's when you're better than you used to be. Credit Wayne Dyer. I will give him the credit on that one. But that is ultimately what we're trying to figure out, is when we are the one who defines who we are. I'm really trying not to upset you, Cherie, and because I'm a moral person. But if I do, yeah, exactly. But if I do,
I got thick skin. I'm good.
Yeah, but my point is, you don't define me.
Yeah.
You don't define me. This is what Hollywood stars have no clue over, because they are completely defined by their looks, by the way the public perceives them. They have PR firms. I don't care what the public thinks of me. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing because I have my relationship with God. That's called faith. Then you get into a really deep conversation.
Yeah, I love, so for just FYI, how much of a young nerd I am. And so is my son that's 25. He's studying psychology. He's almost got his bachelor's. And
as long as he's studying Jungian psychology,
he's not getting that. He's not getting a lot of Jung at school, but he's diving into it on his own. But I have the red book. I saw the original red book in Santa Barbara.
How big is it? Show me. Go like this. How big was that book?
That.
Oh, not that big. Okay, I was thinking some even huge.
Well, actually, there were some of his mandalas that were that. Everybody listening's like, what are you talking about? But anyway, for Christmas, I got Noah, my son, a set of his black books. I don't know if you've heard of the black books, but they've recently released some of his journaling with commentary. And
is
it's
this when he kind of got weird at the end when he had his partner? What was his partner's name again?
No,
Philemon or something like that.
No, I don't think so. It was sort of the precursor to the red book. It's kind of when he was diving down to the collective unconscious and kind of going into the underworld, sort of that descent journey, and taking his own descent journey. And anyway, it's really fascinating.
The whole haze thing. Does he do something that makes, what's the guy that did the whole the pocket, the different levels of hell? Who's that again?
Oh, I'm not sure, but no, I haven't read it yet. I just gave it to my son for Christmas. And I'm like, as soon as you're done with these, I want to read them. Yeah. But let's go into your paradigm. Let's go into your new archetype. What do you see? What lives in you as an embodiment, let's just say, of a healthy marriage or a successful marriage in the new way that you're describing?
Okay, in what manner? I mean, again, I'm getting
you said along. You said you came up with your own sort of new archetype.
Well, the archetype that I'm explaining is because, you know, archetypes are basically in the collective is what motivates us. It's what it's in, and what you realize is that we've been motivated in the past by us versus them.
Okay, so the new way
is
there is no
separate,
competition.
is the converse of separate but equal. Are you familiar with separate but equal?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for people that are listening, it was the law that was passed in 1896 that was overturned in the Brown versus Board of Education rule in 1954. So in other words, you're the flip side of separate but equal is that you're not a woman, is that you're Cherie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not a guy. I'm Tim. If you classify me as a guy, as a white guy, you want to start putting any stereotype around me, then you're going to use that against me. That is the mindset is you look at somebody for who they are as an individual, as opposed to, you know, I don't even, you know, I'm a Missourian. I grew up in St. Louis. I mean, I don't even classify myself by where I'm from. I mean, I say I'm from Missouri, but I'm identifying who I am by me, by what I do, what I've done. You know, this notion of saving marriages and lowering the divorce rate. You know, that's a relationship that I have with God. I honestly feel that I'm picking up where Carl Jung left off to a certain extent and taking his message, because Carl Jung was too nice to the rest of the psychology world. And you know, I'm going to be a little more direct when psychologists start approaching me and trying to get into a conversation of Jung versus Freud. I mean, this is a mission that but the prejudice archetype is something we have to learn how to turn that switch on, that it's not a good thing. We take it, and I use the social examples, like, you know, I have a Martin Luther King section right next to a Hitler section in my book, but we're doing that to get people more aware of their belief system about love.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, again, the goal isn't to find love. The goal is to find the barriers you have within yourself that keep you from opening up for love. And those barriers are prejudice against what's common sense, is just being open with your partner.
Yeah, and coming into that space of vulnerability is releasing. Yeah, exactly. It's really, it's not an easy process. I've been married coming up on 27 years this year, and you know, we've walked the path of independence. We've walked the path of codependence, interdependence, and now it's like I'm married to me first, and he's ultimately married to himself. We come together as whole beings, seeing each other as whole, not seeing the flaws. I mean, they're there and they're going to be there. And it's the same with my kids. You know,
yeah, but that is, if I could real quickly, that is the point of the partnership. When you get what a partnership is, and I have a real nerd example, Bill Gates, Paul Allen, beard, engineer, nerd, Bill Gates, sales guy, is you have your skill sets and your partner has his or her skill sets. And that, once you look at it from that perspective, now you don't want to be the same person. No. This is a big mistake that people make, is why aren't you thinking like me? Well, you should look at your partner and say, I'm glad you're not thinking like me, because that makes us a better partner.
Yeah, how boring would that be if you were a clone of me? But that's exactly. But on a subconscious level, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get that person to conform to our set of ideals, beliefs, standards, ways of being. And that's not ultimately why we attracted each other in the first place. We attracted each other because we're here to help each other evolve.
A mirror.
That person, well, yes, a mirror. And also, but that person, I believe, and this is also very Jungian, like that we emit a frequency of what the places in us that need to evolve or heal. You could call it karma, whatever, places that are, maybe it's stuck trauma, maybe it's stored, it could be epigenetic, whatever.
Can I explain to you what that is?
What was that?
Can I explain to you what that is?
Yeah, but just a second. So we attract that. Let me finish my thought, and then you can. We attract that, and then we blame them later because they've triggered it, when actually it's that triggers that they may have been the only genetic combination of a person or a soul that could have triggered that for us. And yeah, I'm sure there's a term for it, but people talk about soulmates and all of this. I mean, kind of everyone's your soulmate. We're all on the same journey. I mean, not from a romantic standpoint.
Right. We're all energy. We are all energy.
we're all, and you could even say at a core level, yeah, we're just energy trying to work out an evolution of consciousness with each other. And so when you get, I think it's too hierarchical when people start saying, oh, you know, this is my church over here, and then this is my soulmate over here, and then this is my family over. It's like, great, but we are all in it together. Every one of us, we're all in it together. There's no hierarchy in spirit. And anyway, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, like, but that epigenetic piece is huge, because I do believe it's not just your direct ancestors, it's the collective. And I can tell you, I feel the feminine collective in my own body, and have for many years on some of these issues.
I bet your husband loves that, because you're getting him to be emotional.
Yeah, but I mean, just the feminine wound, wound.
Yeah.
And I know there's a huge masculine one as well. Oh gosh, we have waxed so philosophical, but it's really good. Jungian stuff. It's not for the faint of heart. And it sounds like you dove really deep into his work, and it's
do I have a minute to explain?
I want to just round this out for our listeners in terms of what, like how the attraction, that's what I wanted you to finish, is that attraction factor into the unhealed pieces of ourselves.
Jung referred to them as the anima and the animus.
Yes.
Okay,
that rings a bell.
Exactly. The anima is the vision of a woman and a man, and the animus is a vision of a man and a woman. Okay, it's an unconscious motivation. This is, and then I get in. I don't want to sit in a sidebar, but we get into, like, two women together or two men together, and then you try to figure out the anima and the animus in those dynamics. But that is another proactive conversation to have as well. But what we're doing is we're creating a vision of a partner. And when we date and we break up, they're called stepping stones for a reason. But when you meet him or her, the anima and the animus are what connects. This vision, but it's so important to understand about it, because what we're discussing, what Cherie and I are discussing, is the unconscious. What we're doing is we're making people consciously aware of how the unconscious works, which is sort of an oxymoron comment. But you have to understand that unconsciously you're looking for somebody. And when you meet somebody, because I like to joke that you can't go to the local Walmart and find a replacement booth. I'm done with you. I'm going to go find a replacement husband or a replacement wife at Walmart. You've met somebody, and the way that Jung describes the manifestation of the relationship between the anima and the animus when they are not getting along is they manifest themselves in the irrationality of a man's feeling and a woman's thinking. And so what he's saying in that phrase is, when you're not getting along because of the relationship between the anima and the animus, the man shuts his feeling side down and the woman shuts his logical side down. What he's explaining is why communication breaks down in a relationship. Because the logical and emotional, those are two different conversations to have. And so you got to keep that from happening, so you can keep growing, so that you guys don't let your weaker side go dormant and then die off, which is what you're trying to figure out, how to embrace something you're not good at. I'm not gay, not that there's anything wrong with it, as Jerry Seinfeld so famously said, because I become a better partner and trying to be better emotionally. I understand I'm very logical, obviously, but I want to be a better person to my partner. In order for me to do that, I have to be more of an emotional person, not as a negative. There's nothing weak with a guy being emotional.
Yes, and that I have 3 sons, and it's something I'm very conscious of with them. And I know you have a son as well.
My son has an emotional father that he can look up to, and I want him to be emotional.
Yes, and how the masculine has been harmed by the patriarchy.
Of course.
And yeah, we could go really deep into that. Yeah, thank you for bringing up the anima and the animus. That's something I have lightly scratched the surface on. I don't know if you're familiar with Anne Baring. She's somebody she's a Jungian. She's 90 years old, but she's my heroine, and I'm going to have her on this podcast. But she's written a beautiful book called Dream of the Cosmos. And she's also written some stuff on the myth of the goddess. The woman is insanely connected to Jungian in ways that empower the feminine and the masculine, but she leads with her feminine. And so it's quite powerful. You'll have to look her up on YouTube. She's from England.
What was her name again?
Anne Baring, Baring, Anne with an E. So Tim, how can we round this out for our listeners in ways that maybe we'll just quickly tackle, like, let's just say there has been a power differential with, you know, maybe it's not this way with me and my husband, we're flipped. Actually, I step into my masculine sometimes and he steps into his emotion, but it's easy for us to flip back and forth.
You guys are more aware than most people though.
We've done a lot of work.
Yeah.
But what are a few practical ways to really hear each other and to be able to have that shared partnership where you have equal authority? And by the way, that was not modeled to me at all, not necessarily because of my parents, but because of my religion. But having that shared egalitarian authority and leadership and let's just say honoring each other's natural proclivities and being able to just stand as equals. You said separate but not equal, right?
Well, separate but equal was the way they rationalized.
Separate but equal, yeah. That's so loaded, right? I mean, it's I get it, but it's loaded. Yeah. So but you don't want to be separate, really. You want to be as one, but you still want to keep your individuation.
It's a balance of connection and individuality, of course.
Yeah. So it's kind of that dance between, okay, sometimes I'm feeling more vulnerable. I need you to step over and sort of like be the brain here and take care of things and protect me and all of that.
Right, hold me, yeah.
And then my husband, you know, when he had his gallbladder out, I sort of took that role, right? It's not necessarily so specific to the gender roles that we've ascribed to this shared power. So what are just a couple maybe practical ways that, or just to get us thinking along these lines of ways that we can...
I'm gonna get them thinking with this one. So so I didn't go through my background. I'm not a psychologist. I actually was the first semiconductor analyst on Wall Street to focus on the communications market. I come at this from I had all of that happen before I started studying spirituality. So I have a very analytical approach to what I do. But the point is I worked on Wall Street and I used to be rich. Mm-hmm. I started in 1993 with $7,000 invested in the stock market. By January of 2000, it was $12.5 million. And I lost almost all of that in 6 months. And the point I'm making is, she asked for something you could take away because I've made a huge mistake. And the point that she's asking for me to make with you is, and this is going to be maybe a little tough at first, but then when you think about it, the difference between somebody who is intelligent and somebody who is ignorant is one of them knows they're ignorant. If you could learn that you don't know everything, if I could give one piece of advice that will take your marriage in the right direction in a big way, that's simply approach your conflicts with the understanding that you are humble. Please don't go and lose $12.5 million to learn this. Let me depreciate a little bit of my cost onto you in this lesson. That if you can learn that you don't know everything, that will do wonders for your marriage, because it makes you more curious and open-minded to another perspective that you may not yet see. And that's when you start understanding the other person's perspective. But you got to open your eyes up to the realization that you don't know everything before you're going to open your mind up to the possibility that there may be another opinion you don't realize.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's a very mindful approach too. I mean, like getting curious and observing.
Right.
Women and men just want to be seen and heard.
We all want the same thing. That's the whole weird thing about this conversation. Why are we even having it? We both want the same thing.
And it's like, I don't know about you. I like to be right. My husband likes to be right. And we decided, you know, that was a huge barrier to not hearing each other.
Yeah, but you both, what's so weird about it, I show a picture. This is how I summarize communication. It's an optical illusion. You look at it from one side, it looks like 4 beams. And you look at it from the other side, it looks like 3 beams. And above the head of one guy looking on one side says 4, and above the head on the other side, the guy says 3. And so the question is, which is correct? And the answer, literally, the answer is both are correct. You can be right and your husband's going to be right. But you're probably saying the same thing as close as you guys are probably, it sounds like you guys have gotten. You're saying the same thing, just in different directions. You just have to open your eyes up to maybe looking at, oh, now I see what you mean.
Yeah. And that just, honestly, it takes deep breathing. It takes conscious focus. It's because you're formulating your rightness in your head and your response ahead of, what they're saying. And I catch myself doing this with my kids sometimes as well. So, okay, cool. So approaching your partner as if you're completely ignorant of, like, you're the beginner,
I love it when somebody says to their partner, you're saying this to me. And they're like, no, I'm not. You're like, yeah, you are. Now, hang on a minute. They just told you they weren't. But you keep saying, yes, you are saying this to me. It's like, you do not know what they are thinking yet. You have got to figure that out if you're going to be able to make that statement.
Right. We don't. We literally cannot. And I think this is where Christ consciousness comes in. It's higher power stuff. It's help me understand this person.
Treat others as you want to be treated.
Yeah, the golden rule. Like,
one.
It really is. And I think you said this earlier. It really just comes down to love. Like, we could stop our whole discussion and say, climb into understanding love.
As a noun, not a verb. As a noun, not a verb. You are love, not you
capital
do.
L.
Yes.
And I certainly, I have to be gentle with myself, because I find that I flip in and out of wanting that based on different situations and circumstances. And it's
just understand fear, though. That's all you're doing, Cherie, is if you add fear into what is the fear underlying whatever anxiety or discomfort here coming from me or coming from my husband, just realize that it comes from a place of fear, and fear and love cannot coexist in the same room. So you're able to address the fear and overcome the fears, which takes courage. That's the vulnerability thing you and I were talking about before we started. Then you're able to open yourself up to be completely transparent with your partner. And you have to have a judgment-free zone in order to do that. Once you create that judgment-free zone, then you and your partner are able to, nobody's going to judge anybody. Just make that clear at the beginning. As long as you don't judge me, I don't judge you. I'm going to tell you everything, and you can tell me everything. Screw up, I don't care. We're going to figure it out, because you and I are partner, and the two of us together make more sense than us apart.
Yeah, good synopsis. I love the whole judgment-free zone. That's like a life goal. # life goals is for me to be a judgment-free person.
Exactly.
However, I'm a work in progress with that, but I feel like that is the Christ consciousness. That is, when I look at people who I perceive have very healthy marriages or partnerships, it's there's just a respect there. It's palpable. It's an allowing, and it's not about ego. It just
so
flows.
let me real quick, because this is really cool. I just realized this the other day. One of the things I do for a hobby, that's how weird I am, is I psychoanalyze celebrities. So it's the couple, the Janices in Waco, Texas, the two that are doing the home improvement.
What's their names? Yeah, I know who I can see.
No, I'm talking about. I'm sorry, I forgot their name. But I was watching them in the interview the other day, and the husband was talking, and while he's talking, he's looking at his wife to get her affirmation visually on whether she's agreeing with him. He wasn't talking for himself. He was talking on behalf of both of them. And I could see in his eyes, those two, as much as they have a beautiful relationship. You can see it the way they interact with each other. And just, I saw the respect in his eyes as he's talking to the camera, but while he's talking to the camera, he's looking over Joanna Gaines, the Gaines's.
Yeah.
He's looking over Joanna while he's talking, because I know he's saying, I hope I'm saying what we agreed to, because he's looking for her reaction. It's not me talking to you directly without my spouse having any input. It's the two of them talking as a team. And that was a beautiful. I loved it when I saw that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Tim. How can people find you online?
Well, the easiest way is I'm actually the founder of one of the largest marriage groups on Facebook. The name of the group is called The Marriage Support Group. And as of this recording, we just went over 22,000 members. So it's in fact, I allow other marriage experts. It's a very democratic society. My mission to lower the divorce rate is not about Tim. This is about anybody goes there, you can get help. And there's a lot of people to go to. but it's my group. You can contact me there. But the easiest way is my email address, which is my name, Tim Kellis, Kellis at happy relationships with a plural.com. Yeah, that's my domain name. So Tim Kellis at happyrelationships.com is the way you can reach out to me. I offer a free 2-hour seminar. If anyone wants to sit down and have a conversation about, how we can get together, I can start a dialogue.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This was really deep and awesome.
I love that. You made my day, my week. I love these conversations. Thank you very much as well, Sheree, because you and I are the same wavelength on this whole conversation, and it's us as a group that we've got to come together and build a community. I hope your audience realizes the depth of the conversation that you have with people, because you don't just have these with me. So I hope your audience is realizing how cool that they've discovered you as the podcast that you're creating. But just continue luck with your messages as you get this out to the people, so we can all figure this out. It's called No Prison. I don't want to be in prison in my mind, by the way.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that.